presidente hace su ingreso, presidente Juan Manuel Santos y el presidente Bill Clinton en este instante.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all of you to be here. Wow, that round of applause was something. President Clinton, President Santos, it's an honor to have you both here. First, let me tell you that I'm starting my career as a moderator. It's the first time I try to do this. So please forgive me all my mistakes. I'll try to do it as smooth as possible. Second, I normally know that when the moderator talks too much, then the full panel goes down. So I'll try to talk the least, and I'll leave to both of you presidents to give us your insights. Here we are, 25 million families around the world live on coffee. That means around 100 million people. And if you take indirectly involved in coffee, we will be talking about 500 million people. Close to 10% of the world's population then is touched by this magic bean. So, without further ado, let me ask you, President Clinton, the first question. As President of the United States and former President and head of the Clinton Foundation, you've been a leading voice and a doer in the world in the fight against poverty and promoting social stability and democracy through economic development all around the world. Of course, in countries like Colombia, Latin American countries, Haiti, and most of the Africans. Can you share with us your global experience on how to tackle the biggest challenges in the field of developing countries and what to do in the countryside, in the coffee growing areas? Please, President Clinton, we'll be glad to hear you.
Well, first of all, thank you, and thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Mayor. Governor, let me say how honored I am to be back in Colombia, and especially in Medellin. Yesterday, I got to see the fruits of peace. For those of you who don't come from this part of the world, it is inconceivable that we could have had this meeting in this place even a few years ago. Yesterday, I went up to Comuna 7, Commune 13, which is about 28 stories straight up in the air, and I rode what to me is the most important infrastructure project in Colombia, because at my age I never could have climbed the hill. So I rode the escalators up. And what's that got to do with coffee? If you go up there and you know anything about what life was like before, and you see what life is like now, you see that peace is better than war, and cooperation is better than conflict, and economics is about addition, not subtraction. It's about multiplication, not division. There are people here from Indonesia. When I worked in Indonesia for the United Nations after the tsunami, one of the things we tried to do was to get the coffee going back in Aceh, and Starbucks was of enormous help, and they actually had, before the tsunami, this long-standing civil conflict in Aceh, which was settled after the earthquake, after the tsunami, because people saw all the death, all the destruction, and they wanted to begin again, and they knew they had to do it together, and coffee became the symbol and a way they could make a living. So, my experience, besides Aceh, is largely confined to the work we've done in Haiti, where we established with La Colombe a coffee academy, found buyers for the coffee, and then got more people back into the coffee business. It's interesting. Brazil's the #1 coffee producer in the world. 130 years ago, Haiti produced more coffee than Brazil and everybody else. So we worked there. We worked in Rwanda and other parts of East Africa, where we established an academy and a coffee roasting facility. The farmers told us that the most important thing we did was to give them good quality beans, good instruction and materials for growing, and the means to intercrop, to grow other things, so that they could earn more money even with the variation of coffee prices. Then, when other places and buyers started to copy what Colombia pioneered with sustainable practices, it helped. But I think, the world population is going to grow. The average age in most countries is going up now. There will be more coffee drinkers. However, the price will vary from year to year, as we all know, and we all know why. So I think the most important thing we can do is to see coffee as an anchor of rural development. I also believe now it's more important than it was when I started working on this many years ago to take climate change into account. Ethiopia, for example, is the largest producer in Africa of Arabica coffee, and they could lose an enormous amount of their crop just because of climate change. One of the things that's been, I was talking to President Santos about last night, our foundation has worked with 2 of his islands, San Andres and Providencia, to try to come up with a plan to go to 100% clean electricity. The president of Costa Rica is here. His country is now more than 99% clean electricity. This also generates more money in rural areas, reduces the cost of electricity, and gives you more money to put in. So I think that we need to see coffee as the anchor of a more stable rural society that in a troubled area like Colombia can help people move away from terror and violence. In an economically distressed area can help people make a living where they grew up and not have to move to cities, putting more pressure on the strained resources of government. And I think we have to do it, given the details are different in country to country, with constant training and more affordable, if we buy in volume, more affordable inputs, and then better supply and distribution chains. In Africa, for example, you might be interested to know this, that typically when farmers live in remote areas where the roads are so limited and no farmer has wheel transportation, when we started working there, the farmers were paying 80%, half of their income, 50% of their income, just to get their crops to market. Before they had cell phones, they didn't know whether they got an honest price or not. So we just tried to give everybody a cell phone and then take the crops to market with storage where necessary so they could get a good price, and they only paid a fair cost to move the crops to market, not half their income. That's not a problem in some places. So I would say you need a national strategy We have to take climate change into account, and you need to see coffee as an anchor crop. In Colombia, which has the largest number, I think, of separate bird species on Earth, somewhere around 1900, and Brazil and Colombia are the first and second most biodiverse countries in the world, you can also make sustainable coffee production a part of ecotourism, which is also true for Costa Rica. So that's my theory. If you want to know how to make this work, first you've got to make the coffee work. Second, you have to ask that the coffee growers get a fair percentage of the end price of the coffee. If I pay $3 or $4 for a cup of Starbucks in my little town in New York, I don't really care as long as I know that Starbucks is out there trying to do what I saw them do in the beginning in Rwanda and Aceh and modernizing it. I just want the farmers to get a fair deal. Second, you should think of how coffee can be used to fight climate change, both in preserving the soil and in diversifying crops, and in reducing the inequality between urban living and rural living in country after country after country. If you have a comprehensive strategy and then you just take these things one thing at a time, I think it can make a real difference, as I think it is in the places I've had the privilege to work.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let's go to President Santos. President, after your talk and hearing you, how you fluently see the coffee world, we all know that you are a true coffee man. We heard some voices talking about, why don't we producers get together and why don't we agree to something? It's not the first time in history that we sit together. Can you recall and tell us some of the efforts from the coffee growers through the history to try to agree and move prices and do something to make a better living, please?
Thank you, Roberto. And President Clinton, let me start by saying you've come many times to Colombia, but this is the first time you come after we finished our war. And this peace that we now are starting to construct has been the effort of many people. But among them, you have been extremely important. Not only were you the person who launched Plan Colombia, which was fundamental to what we have now, but also you supported us when we took the step to start the peace process. So what you did yesterday of going up the cable here in Medellin, and you say this is unthinkable some years ago, you have a lot to do with this, and from 49 million Colombians, thank you very much. And of course, there have been many efforts around in the last 40, 50, 60 years. The International Coffee Organization was established in 1963. 54 years ago. And it was established because coffee was then, and it is still now, a very important commodity. Not only in economic terms, but in social terms. 60 countries produce coffee, and most of the countries have small producers, so the effect on the social fabric of all these countries is enormous. And to maintain a dignified income for the producers has been an objective throughout all these years. And we've tried many things. The International Coffee Organization, it was established to regulate prices, regulate quotas. It worked very well for some time. I believe that for many, thank you. For many people, during the existence of the coffee agreement, okay. The coffee agreement meant a lot to Colombia. That was a period of tremendous prosperity in the coffee regions, which allowed us to invest more in the well-being of the whole region. And when the International Coffee Agreement collapsed, there were many efforts, and even during the agreement, when we could not agree on the prices and quotas, the producers made many efforts. There was an association of producing countries. At that time and still now, the difference between the price of a cup of coffee in the United States or in Paris or in Tokyo compared to what the producers receive is, I would say, obnoxious. The difference. $3.50, for example, a cup of coffee in Starbucks in New York. The producer in Costa Rica, or Honduras, El Salvador, or Uganda, or Cameroon, or Kenya, or Colombia receive less than 5 cents. $3.50, and the producer receives less than 5 cents. So the effort to gain just a bit, not something extravagant, just a small percentage to increase the effect in the social fabric of all of these 60 countries would be enormous. But to organize something that is effective, you need institutions. If we agreed with Honduras and Salvador and the African countries, the Central American countries, let's do something to restrict the outflow of coffee, to control prices. You need institutions in all those 60 countries, which you don't have right now. And you didn't have at then, so it was very difficult. We tried to counteract the tremendous influence and concentration from the buyer side in the coffee exchanges, in the exchange in New York and London especially. We even made a fund. It was called Pan Café. We put $400 million at that time because we were suffering from, for example, Colombia sold its coffee through what we call special deals. A buyer agreed to buy 500,000 bags of Colombian coffee, and he said, ship those bags every month during the next 10 months, and we will price each shipment according to the price of the coffee exchange in New York at certain dates. And what happened? The buyer sold that day in the exchange, lowered the price. He lost a few dollars in the paper exchange, but purchased this coffee much cheaper at a great profit in the physical transaction. So we tried to do a countermeasure through Pan Café. We were with, I remember there was a very smart Salvadorian who managed that fund. He started, and everybody who participated started to be investigated by the U.S. authorities for manipulation of the markets. So that deal went wrong. So there have been many efforts. And something today, the best wall you can construct is to pay better to the coffee farmers of Central America. This is in the rural areas. That's where poverty is concentrated. That's where you should invest more. There's no other commodity that has a better effect in the well-being of the rural areas than the coffee. So any effort that we can agree with the buyers, with the whole chain of the industry, to pay a bit better the producers will be in the benefit of everybody. Because today, the amount of inventories in the world markets is very, very small. If something happens in a big frost in Brazil or something, climate change makes us more sensitive to the coffee volatility. If something happens now, dramatic as it happened in 1975, 1977, and so many times, and we run out of coffee, this is the worst thing for the roasters, for the buyers, for the sellers, and for the producers. So it's in the interest of everybody to make some kind of friendly agreement, to buy a little better, to pay a little more to the producers, because that will guarantee the supply, which is extremely important for the whole chain. And you continue, as you said, President Clinton, to maintain the growth of the consumption overall. And again, the benefit, social benefit of the social fabric of 60 countries, more than 25 million families, will be enormous. So, yes, we've made a lot of efforts. They have all failed, but we must continue to try.
Thank you, President Santos. I think the message is clear. It's a matter of agreeing the full chain rather than just a part of the chain. And on that, I would like to ask you, President Clinton, one of the biggest successes of the bipartisan foreign policy in the U.S. was Plan Colombia under your leadership and administration. We ended up the period of pointing each other and blaming each other for the consumption and production. And on that, a key concept that helped to achieve was the co-responsibility, understood as the need for all parties involved to address the problem together. The coffee value chain faces more or less the same threat. We still, and we think that there's a need that all the members and all the links of the chain will be co-responsible for the next one. Thus, starting from a coffee producer up to the one that serves the coffee cup, would be together thinking on how to make sustainable the full chain. It seems, from our point of view, that industry players may be thinking in how to keep the right supplies at the right price, whereas the farmers want a decent living. How can we reconcile all those positions? How can we agree ourselves?
Well, let me first say, I want to thank President Santos for what he said. But we have many people here who don't come from Latin America. So in case you didn't understand what he meant, I will translate it again. When there's all this talk about putting a wall up in America to keep undocumented immigrants out, the Mexicans were singled out. There was no net increase in immigration from Mexico to the United States from 2010 through 2015. Why? Because they could make a living at home. Now maybe it's picked up a little bit because they had problems in the last couple of years. There was, however, an increase in narco trafficking, partly because of the vulnerability of the economies in Central America. Costa Rica has the highest per capita income in Central America by a very large margin. It's also the greenest country in Central America, perhaps in the world. So they make money out of coffee plus ecotourism plus lower power rates plus having the money then reinvested in education and health care. Recovering balance in the Honduran, the Salvadoran, the Guatemalan economies, Nicaragua is very, very important. That's what he's saying. And our foundation, along with the Carlos Slim's Foundation, you know, we work in a lot of these countries, and we try to help diversify the economy to make coffee an anchor, but have supporting crops, and give people a way to make a living, and also a reason to say no to narco trafficking. And I thank you for what you said there. I believe the answer to your question is that in every place we have had a shortage of two things. One is everybody should imagine and try to agree on, what would you like rural Colombia to look like in 5 years or 10 years? If you're Indonesian and you're thinking about everywhere you grow coffee, what would you like to look like? If you're Kenyan, and we just gave, my wife and daughter and I have probably drunk the coffee of every country represented here, because we're all probably addicted to it and endlessly curious. But Kenya has a constant battle with deforestation, because poor people, when they run out of money, cut trees down and use it to make charcoal and sell or to heat. Then they do better, and then they don't. So we just gave Kenya an environmental map, my foundation did, which shows you in every piece of land in the country what's there, what's happened to the topsoil, what's the composition of it, where is the sun shining best, where is the wind blowing best, what are your options. Everybody needs a plan. You may have to adopt them. Then the governments need the support of the coffee buyers and the big companies in building their capacity to execute the plan. The big difference in my life now, since I'm not president, and when I was president, I spent all my time fighting political battles and then trying to answer two questions. The two main questions in politics. What are you going to do, and how much does it cost? You want to cut taxes? How much are you going to cut them? Where will the money come from? You want to have a peace process and give people a different life? How much are you going to spend on it? The problems with government today, where all of you can help, is that the more troubled a place is, the less capacity it is likely to have to actually figure out how to do these things. So now, in my life, I spend all my time trying to answer the third question. Whatever you want to do, and however much money it costs, how are you going to do it? How do you turn your good intentions into positive changes? So I in a way, answered the question you just asked me in my opening remarks. I think you have to give the coffee farmers more of the end price of coffee, but you have to do it recognizing that if you're selling coffee in places where the cost of living is much higher than it is in the places where it's grown, it's always going to be a small percentage of the final price of a cup. You just want it to be a little more. And so you have to work that. Is there a way to help people up and down the chain cut their costs so their profits don't go down, but the farmers' incomes go up? I think it's a mistake to think that coffee alone can save a rural economy. Coffee can be the bedrock, because when people are, you take Brazil, we were talking about this last night. Brazil is the largest coffee producer in the world now, and nobody's taking down, as far as I know, once you plant the coffee trees and they start to produce, there's a pretty strong incentive not to tear them down, right? The only reason the rainforest gets torn down, it's a lousy idea because the topsoil is so small. They tear it down and graze cattle and grow soybeans for a year or two, then it's gone. The only reason they do it is they have no other land. Coffee can become an anchor to keep vegetation and even other trees up. But someone needs to be thinking about this. First, you need where we want to be. Then you've got to have really good plans for literally what are you going to do in this district as opposed to that district as opposed to the other to fill out the branches. What other crops are you going to grow? What other things are people going to be able to do? What are you going to do with the revenues that you generate? How could they, if it takes energy to do it, how are you going to cut the energy price by taking advantage? Almost every place here on all continents has a lot of sun, and most of you have a lot of wind, and the price of both in generating electricity has gone way down. So ironically, reducing the emissions from burning diesel and heavy oil will increase economic growth and increase net profits to poor farmers if you do it right. But my own view is, I spent literally virtually all my time since I left being in government trying to figure out actually how do you do these things, or getting people together who knew a lot more about it than I do and letting them talk about that. You have to start with a big goal, then you have to break it down into pieces. Don't put too much on coffee, ride coffee, because the consumption's going to go up. But think about, well, how can I get other crops? How can I reduce deforestation? How can I preserve the soil? How can I preserve the species? In Latin America, that's a huge deal. Species are other life forms are disappearing from Earth at the most rapid rate in 10,000 years. No one has any clue what the consequences of life will be for everyone in this audience under 30 years old. Not a clue. But you can say you care about it, but if you don't have a strategy that literally enables a poor farmer anywhere in the world to make a living, you're not going to do anything about it. So anyway, that's my advice. Ride coffee, but don't depend only on it. Use it to grow other crops. Diversify incomes and get more dollars. I agree with what President Santos said. But there's not enough work being done by enough people to answer all these how questions. If you can't answer the how question, you know, I love to brag on Costa Rica, but it's easier to do in Costa Rica than it is in Brazil just because of scale. It's no accident that a lot of the best run countries in the world are smaller ones because your span of control is better. And it's no accident that the president here takes a lot of grief for what he's trying to do to bring peace, because he's dealing with a lot of moving parts, including people who were part of groups that once were for political reform and later just became protection rackets for the narco-traffickers. What he wants is for people to stop being killed, to stop doing stupid things, to give his country a normal future, to have every place feel as safe as I felt yesterday on those escalators. But figuring out how to do it is a different thing. So my advice is, if this organization wanted to do something, is to get a lot of people who actually do these how questions. And they can't only be from coffee producers, they can't only be from coffee buyers, and they can't even only be from people in the coffee business. You want to ride coffee into the future, not depend only on it. It's not fair to the people who grow it. It's not fair to the people who sell it. It's not fair to the people who buy it. But it's a magical resource if you do it right.
Thank you, Mr. President. President Santos, there are not many Colombians that have made and been so instrumental players in turnaround of Colombia in the last 18 years. As Minister of Finance at Plan Colombian's inception, as Minister of Defense at Plan Colombian's implementation, as a President that was able to end the conflict with FARC a few months ago, and finalized the disarmament process a couple of weeks ago. What do you think is the role that rural Colombia will play in guaranteeing the democratic stability and growing economy that we are all looking forward?
Thank you for the question, because coffee has a lot to do with the answer. When we started to negotiate with the FARC, we said very clearly, we are not going to negotiate a revolution by decree, meaning that we were not going to negotiate our fundamental policies. We are going to negotiate a way for you to lay down your arms and integrate into our democratic system and continue with your ideological fight through legal means and without violence. And they said, but we need to tell something to all the guerrilla members and the people we've been fighting for during all these 50 years. And we started to talk about the rural areas. And suddenly we discovered that there was no major difference between what they were asking for and what we had planned in our own development plan. So the only item of the agenda that had to do with public policy that we included in the negotiation was rural development. And we negotiated a series of investments and actions from the government to bring development to the rural areas. And this is what we had to do with or without the FARC, because the poverty is concentrated in the rural areas, because the huge differences between the inequality is concentrated in the rural areas, and if you want to have a sustainable country in terms of development, not only in the environment, but socially and politically, you need to narrow the gap. So if you invest in the rural areas, you guarantee sustainability in the long run. So what we have, the big challenge and the big opportunity, it's more than a challenge, it's an opportunity, in a world that is starting to become very worried about where food is going to come from, and Colombia is one of the few countries who has this capacity to expand in a major way the production of food, then the big opportunity we have with peace that we did not have before, because the conflict was in the rural areas and the state could not go and develop those areas because of the war. Now we have a tremendous opportunity. And we were talking yesterday with the Colombian coffee producers that we want to expand the production of coffee. We have more or less 14 million bags today, 14 and a half. We want to expand it. I was thinking about 18, but a major coffee buyer who knows Colombia very well. He's here now with us. Mikhail Neumann is over there with his wife Sabine. He said, no, you should be more ambitious. You go for 20. 20 million bags is 6 million bags more of production in Colombia. We can do that now that we have freed almost half of our country that we could not develop before. So the big challenge now is, and not only coffee, there's many types of food that we can produce, is to use, for example, the experience, and I think in the world there's no better experience than what your institution, the Colombian Coffee Federation, has done to take development to the rural areas, because they have been very smart. The Coffee Federation has, in a way, done what you were mentioning, President Clinton. They not only try to pay better the producers, they take infrastructure, roads, lower electricity costs, schools, hospitals. They take development. That's why the quality of the coffee grower in Colombia, in the coffee regions, the well-being is much higher than the rest of the rural areas, still. And I think this is a great example, and we have a tremendous opportunity now that we have peace, because then we can go. Before, any constructor of a road would simply say, I will go there because I will be kidnapped, I will be extorted, or be killed. Now we have a different situation. So the opportunities are enormous. And the experience of the coffee, or what coffee has done during the last 50 years in Colombia, the last 90 years, we celebrated yesterday the 90 years of the existence of the Colombian Coffee Federation, which has had a history of a parallel history with the development of our democracy. I even did my thesis in the university about how coffee had been instrumental in the stability of the Colombian democracy, which is probably the oldest democracy in Latin America.
Thank you, President Santos. President Clinton, you have witnessed many peace processes in the world, and you have been a leader in institution building and economic development. After the peace agreement that President Santos reached with the FARC, where do you see Colombia in 20 years' time? As a country, as an economy, as a society, and as a member of the international community? Can you tell us a little bit on that?
Well, the answer is it depends on what you do with it. Depends on how you implement it and whether it produces both security and peace on the one hand, and the benefits of peace. The thing that's so important about this escalator up the mountain I took yesterday is it's a visible benefit of peace. People move around more quickly, more comfortably, their lives have improved. It's like a tangible thing. And I think Colombia is so blessed with natural resources and with stunning diversity of them, and with incredibly gifted people. I think if you can preserve the security and have more balanced growth, the place will be unrecognizable in 20 years, in a good way. I think if you don't do something, all of us, don't do more to combat climate change, the chances are that between the loss of the large numbers of your species, anything from orchids to birds, and if there's more poverty in rural areas, then I think there'll be constant pressure to keep cocoa production high. In other words, one of the reasons this conference is so important for Colombia is, in the end, people would rather do the decent thing than the wrong thing. But if you make them make a choice between feeding their children and not, they'll feed their children. Some people will always take advantage of any system and abuse it, but most people everywhere in the world are decent people, hardworking people. They want to raise their children in dignity, and they want to feel at the end of their lives that they've done a good job. Most people everywhere. So I think the whole key is, can we deal with the big threats outside, mostly of climate change and species destruction, and can you increase security and economic opportunity so that the goal that other Colombians are interested in, which is living in peace and having a more legitimate economy with less reliance on cocoa production, I think if you do that, 20 years from now, you won't recognize the place in a very good way. You'll be doing things that are unimaginable. I wish I'd be around to see it. It'll be great.
Thank you, President Clinton. Let me ask you the last question, and it is, President Santos in 1 year will be out of the office, more or less. Can you give President Santos one advice as a former president? What to do?
Well, first of all, if you listen to him today, he knows a lot. You look at him, he's got a lot of energy. And I hope that he will devote himself, at a minimum, to doing what I talked about. A lot of people don't agree with him on the details of the peace process. This is normal. Every place I go, this is, I just read an article yesterday that said that Bill Clinton's most important peace legacy was in Ireland, and the crazy fight over Brexit may wreck it. I won't bore you with the details. Who knows? Here's what I know. There are very few permanent victories or permanent defeats in political, social, economic affairs. What you want is a permanent effort to bring people together instead of tear them apart, and to lift them up instead of pull them down. And what I found was, when I left office, you could do a lot of good when you're not in office. You have to basically trade power for influence and effort. But I hope he'll do that, because he's worked very hard to do something he strongly believes in, and the process of proving it is only just begun.
Thank you, President Clinton. I think we could all listen to President Santos and President Clinton talk for the next 2 or 3 hours, but time is running out, so I would like to thank President Clinton and, of course, President Santos for being with us today, for sharing very deep thoughts with us, what to do, how to move. So please, I just ask you for one more round of applause. Thank you very much.